Здравствуйте, товарищи. Welcome back to Russian Through Propaganda. Today is day 6. And before we begin our grammar, I thought we could finish our very brief walking tour of Red Square. We left off last time, of course, with Lenin's mausoleum. And in case you're wondering, Lenin is indeed still buried there and on full display. He's in a kind of glass sarcophagus. And a lot of people joke that if you stuck a wick in his head and lit it on fire, he would burn like a candle because he's been touched up so many times and waxed over that he really is nothing but a big stick of wax. So there's been quite a bit of debate since the demise of the Soviet Union as to whether he should remain there or be given a more traditional burial. But so far, he's still right where he always has been. And if you go to Moscow, you can file through the mausoleum and see Lenin's body. If we look past the mausoleum behind it to the base of the wall of the Kremlin, we see some other very interesting uh, graves, including that of Yuri Gagarin. He was the first human being to orbit the Earth, and we'll definitely talk a lot about him later because we'll see lots of propaganda posters that are related in one way or another to Yuri Gagarin. You can also see a series of busts um, filed up behind Lenin's mausoleum, and one of them is Stalin's grave. You see that here, Iosif Stalin in Russian. And as you may know, Stalin was not Stalin's actual last name, it was Jurashvili. He was Georgian. And Stalin, just much like Lenin, right, was a sort of nom de guerre that he made up as a Bolshevik revolutionary. It's from the noun stal, which means steel, right? So Stalin is just a typical last name with in suffix, built off the noun stal. Of course, Stalin's death in 1953 is a real historical watershed in our coverage of the Soviet Union, Soviet culture, Soviet history, because it led to the period that in Russian is called the ottepel, which means thaw, like the thaw after winter, right? When the deep freeze starts giving way and the snow starts melting and so forth. So the thaw saw a relaxation of censorship, more freedom in artistic expression, right? And of course, a dramatic decline in political repression. Uh, so our next stop is now we're leaving Red Square, going through the Voskresensky Varota, or Resurrection Gate. There used to be a number of these rather elaborate gates in Moscow. A lot of them, unfortunately, have been lost, and this one too was first destroyed by the communists in order to allow the heavy military machinery to roll onto Red Square and file past Lenin's mausoleum during the big military parades, which they still hold today, by the way, for to mark the anniversary of their victory in Europe in World War II. But these gates were restored, thankfully. So what we see now is just a perfect replica of the old Voskresensky Varota. And we're looking now, if we walked through those gates, we would be on Red Square. If we step away from a bit further from the Kremlin, we can get more of a panoramic view of all the different towers. And of course, the Kremlin, as we'll learn later, every old Russian city has its own Kremlin, if it's a really old one, because the Kremlin was really nothing but the original walled portion of the city. And of course, as Moscow grew and as other cities grew, they would build walls further out. You know, the radius would keep expanding, and they would build new and less elaborate, less imposing fortress walls to protect the ever-growing city. And so today's Kremlin is just basically the innermost, most fortified section of the city of Moscow. In fact, the Russian word for city, gorod, is really has to do more with being walled, right? A city was thought of as something that had walls around it. And believe it or not, the word gorod, the Russian for city, is cognate with the English garden, and yard, right? It's actually the same word. if we reach back far enough in the history of Indo-European languages. So again, the Moskovsky Kremlin is the biggest Kremlin in Russia, and of course, certainly the most famous. But if you go to other historical Russian cities, you'll see Kremlins there as well. We see here the Kolokolnya of Ivan Veliki, or to give it its actual Russian name, Kolokolnya Ivana Velikova, the bell tower of Ivan the Great. So we've gone from Ivan Veliki to Ivana Velikova. Note how we've changed the endings on that, well, in this case, a person's name. Those endings are genitive case endings. So we've gone from Ivan Veliki, which is the nominative form of that name, to Ivana Velikova, which is the genitive case form of that name. And the genitive case is used to express possession. So we're going to talk about that actually rather soon. But for now, it's enough to note that Russian case endings will often do the work of prepositions in English, right? So in English, we say the bell tower of Ivan the Great. In Russian, we expect that idea of through case endings, right? Of course, in English, we could also say Ivan the Great's bell tower, right? Using that apostrophe S. And that actually is one of the few remaining case endings in English, right? A kind of genitive case expressing possession. Let's start with our first propaganda poster. It's a very simple one. Thaw, right? And we see this soldier pointing at us and saying, Thaw, right? You, hey, you. And the caption below reads, Ты записался добровольцем, meaning, have you signed up as a volunteer? Have you volunteered for the army? Now, ты is one of two forms for the second person singular pronoun you, right? There are two ways to say you in Russian. There's a polite way, which is вы, and there's a familiar way, ты, right? So you would only use ты to address close friends, children, family members, people you know very well, right? But to address a stranger or to be polite and formal, you would use the expression вы. So let's look at a few more expressions, just polite everyday expressions. And let's start with the word здравствуйте. The form здравствуйте, note the те at the end, that's the polite way to say be healthy. Remember, literally, this is a command meaning be healthy. And we could say that здравствуйте, здравствуйте, is the вы form of that expression, meaning we use it to be polite, right? To say hello to anyone we would address using the pronoun вы. If we're talking to a friend and we write to someone we would address using ты, then the form would be здравствуй, здравствуй, without the те. So здравствуйте and здравствуй, right? Just reflecting that вы, ты distinction. If you've studied other European languages, you may know something similar. For example, Sie versus du in German, or vous versus tu in French. Now, the expression for goodbye is до свидания, до свидания. A svidanya is literally a seeing again, right? You're seeing someone again. So this is sort of like hasta la vista or au revoir, right? Do svidanya, until our meeting again. This does not have any word that's marked for ty versus vui, so we can say do svidanya to anyone, whether polite or familiar. Now, if you're some more informal versions of greetings that you could use with someone whom you would address as ty are привет, привет, which is like the English hi, здорово, здорово, which means something like hi or good to see you, пока, пока, which means bye, and finally счастливо, счастливо, meaning take care, goodbye. Okay, so those are more informal ways to greet someone or say farewell. Now, how do you know whether to use вы or ты with the Russian? Well, can be complicated, and it depends on a person's own preferences. But generally, if you're talking to a stranger, especially an adult, you should definitely err on the side of caution and use вы, right? If it's some other informal setting, like a party, and there are people your own age, like fellow students and things like that, then you can probably safely just go with ты. But if again, if you're in doubt, use вы, and then if the person, maybe the native speaker, feels that it's appropriate to switch to ты, then they'll ask some version of this question. Давайте перейдем на ты, right? Let's switch over to ты. Давайте перейдем на ты. And again, we'll understand the grammar of that expression much better later in the course. Needless to say, by the end of book one, we will have gone through all the grammar that's involved in this question. But literally, it means let's switch over, or let's transition to ты. Давай or давайте is it's making a proposal, like let's do something. Let us cross over to ты. And your response your response would be хорошо, давай, already using ты, right? So note again, давайте is the вы form of the imperative. Let's do something. And давай is the ты form. So already in the response here, you can see that we've switched from using a вы form to a ты form. We're now going to address each other using ты. Here are just a few more phrases that you'll be hearing, more everyday kind of polite expressions. Please is пожалуйста, пожалуйста. And that can also mean you're welcome. Now remember that this is one of those few words that's pronounced quite differently from the way it's written, right? Пожалуйста, not пожалуйста, but simply пожалуйста. Пожалуйста. Thank you is спасибо, спасибо. Excuse me is извините, извините. Now this too is an imperative, meaning excuse me, right? You're actually giving a command, you're saying excuse me. Извините with the те is the вы, that's the polite version of the command. The ты version gets rid of the те, and we're left with извини, извини. And again, we'll study these imperative forms in great detail later in the course. Как вы сказали? Literally, how did you say? Now note the вы again. That's a polite way to say, instead of saying что, which literally means what, right? A more polite way to ask what did you say is как вы сказали? Как вы сказали? How did you say? Using вы. Another command, повторите, пожалуйста. Повторите, пожалуйста. Meaning, repeat, please. Repeat. Could you say that again? Повторите, пожалуйста. Good day is доброе утро. Доброе утро. Good day is добрый день. Добрый день. And good evening is добрый вечер. Добрый вечер. You may note the difference on the adjectival ending, right? Доброе versus добрый. And we'll be able to explain that after today's lesson, but we could already say that утро is a neuter noun, while день and вечер are both masculine nouns. So the ending on the adjective changes to agree with the grammatical gender of the noun it's modifying. Okay, a couple more expressions. Мне надо идти. Мне надо идти means I've got to go, time to get going. And another way to say goodbye, до завтра, meaning until tomorrow. Okay, so let's now look at our list of nouns from this chapter, and we'll basically get a preview of the chapter vocabulary, which for now will be almost exclusively nouns and adjectives. We'll start talking more about verbs in chapter 2. Okay, so what is grammatical gender? Again, if you studied almost any European language, you probably have some idea of what this means. For example, French or German, again, Spanish as well, right? every word, every noun in the language has what's called grammatical gender. And that sometimes overlaps with biological gender, but not necessarily, right? Every noun in Russian has gender, not only things that refer to, you know, human beings or animals, right, that we could think of as male or female, right? Even objects, you know, a table, for example, is masculine. A window in Russian is neuter. A book is feminine, right? So when we use these terms, feminine, neuter, masculine, we're in Russian grammar, we really mean usually uh, grammatical gender. Now, one common refrain in this course will be our attempts to point out the ways in which Russian is very difficult, and it is indeed very difficult. It's much more difficult than English or English, French or German, right, which are just closer to English in so many ways. Right, so even though Russian is an Indo-European language, which means it is distantly related to English, it's much more distantly related than other languages you might have studied. And its grammar is generally much more difficult than, say, Spanish grammar or French grammar. Right, so one thing I always do in class is I try to make very clear what is it about Russian that makes it really difficult, and what are some things that are really very easy about Russian. There are certain things about Russian that are much easier than um, uh, things in these other so-called easy European languages you may have studied. And one of those is gender. If you think about, maybe you studied Russian or German or French, for example. If so, you know that you have to memorize the grammatical gender for every noun. And although there may sometimes be clues that can help you know what gender a noun is, it ultimately really is just a matter of memorization, right? You have to, for example, in German, you have to know, is it der, die, or das for every noun, like das Haus, right? Or der Mann, um, or die Frau, right? You have to memorize the gender for every noun. And again, every noun has grammatical gender in German, not just people or animals. Okay, so in Russian, our task is for the most part much easier because we can simply look at a Russian noun and with a few exceptions about which more later, we can tell simply by looking at the noun what its grammatical gender is. So let's start by looking at that, and as we do so, we'll go through and practice pronouncing all of the nouns we'll be using in this chapter. Let's start first with hard nouns. Now remember when we say hard, that's a phonetic expression, meaning a given consonant is hard, right, not soft, right? So, for example, we talked about the difference between a hard the, versus a soft de, which would be like z, right? The, z. Now, we know already from learning the alphabet that we can simply look at any Russian consonant and tell by looking whether it's hard or soft, right? Remember that we assume that it's hard unless it's followed by a soft sign or one of the five soft vowels, right? And those are E, and then the four so-called soft vowels that begin with an ikratkaya sound, ya, you, ye, your, right? So if a consonant is followed by those five letters, we know that it's soft. So when we talk about nouns, we can classify them as either hard or soft. If we say they're hard, we mean that the final consonant in that noun is a hard consonant. So let's start by looking at masculine nouns, and we see that masculine nouns in Russian end in a consonant, right? So we could say, well, how do we spot a masculine noun in Russian? How do we know that a noun is grammatically masculine? Well, if it ends in a consonant, it's masculine. If it ends in a hard consonant, it's a hard masculine noun. A better way to put that is that masculine nouns in Russian have no ending, right? Because the final consonant isn't really an ending. It just simply is showing us that there's no vowel, no actual ending has been added to that word. So as we look across the table on the top of page 25, if we look over at hard feminine nouns, we see that they all end in an ah. So feminine nouns are marked by their own ending, ah, right? For hard nouns, ah. Again, if we look down that row of that table column of hard feminine nouns, we see their final consonant is hard, and we know that by the fact that they're followed by ah, right? Not by ya or some soft vowel, but simply by ah. Finally, neuters are marked by the ending or, right? Hard neuters are marked by or. So we look at a noun, we see the final letter is or, we know that it is grammatically neuter. And again, if we look at the final consonant, for example, an L in diela, it's followed by or, that is, it's not followed by a soft vowel, and we can tell just by the spelling that that is a hard L, and therefore we're dealing with a hard neuter noun. So for now, let's go down the list and just practice pronouncing all these nouns, and note again that these are all hard nouns. Let's start with the masculines, and we see again they all end in a consonant, a hard consonant. Stole, stole, stool, stool, велосипед, велосипед, телефон, телефон, компьютер, компьютер, телевизор, телевизор, плакат, плакат, карандаш, карандаш, рюкзак, рюкзак, ковер, ковер, мяч, мяч, ключ, ключ, вечер, вечер, зонт, зонт, сериал, сериал, фильм, фильм, журнал, журнал, вопрос, вопрос, ответ, ответ, кошелек, кошелек. Now, hopefully, as we were going through those, you remembered all of those finer points of pronunciation we mentioned, I think on day 2, right? Note the devoicing of final consonants, like in the word for bicycle, velocipede, right? That final de is pronounced like a te, right? And also pay attention to the reduction of unstressed vowels. For example, in the word for question, which is va-pros, not vo-pros, but va-pros, right? Because as we know, that first or is unstressed, and because it comes in the syllable directly before the stressed syllable, it rises, as I like to say, to an ah, va-pros. Okay, now for hard feminine nouns. So again, note how all of these end in an ah, and we should be very happy because we realize that we can simply look at a typical Russian noun. If we see an ah, we know that it's feminine. We don't have to memorize that in addition to learning the noun itself. Книга, книга, комната, комната, одежда, одежда, работа, работа, картина, картина, футболка, футболка, этажерка, этажерка, машина, машина, передача, передача, ошибка, ошибка, страница, страница, газета, газета, сумка, сумка, тема, тема, проблема, проблема, задача, задача, ручка, ручка, лампа, лампа, рубашка, рубашка, бумага, бумага. Finally, for neuter nouns, again, they're all going to end in or, right? Hard neuters end in or. Дело, дело, окно, окно, место, место, зеркало, зеркало, кресло, кресло, письмо, письмо, одеяло, одеяло, мыло, мыло, утро, утро, пальто, пальто, кино, кино. Now move down to the next table and we have some soft nouns, right? So the same three genders as before, but now we see that each of these end in a soft, their final consonant is soft, right? So for example, our masculine nouns are all ending in a soft sign, right? That shows what strictly speaking is a zero ending, right? No vowel, no ending of any kind on that word, just a consonant, and that final consonant is soft. We know that by the soft sign, right? If we look at soft feminines, we have not ah, but ya, right? The soft vowel version of that same vowel really just begins with an i kratkaya sound, right? So instead of ah, we have ya, and that final soft vowel allows us to spot a soft feminine noun. Finally, for neuters, instead of or, we have a soft vowel, either usually yeah, but sometimes your. Right now, remember, a your can only appear in a stressed position, and here it's somewhat unusual as an ending. We have just one example here, bilior. Now you can notice already that soft nouns are much less common than hard nouns, right? We only have a few of them, and of course there are quite a few of them in the language, but relatively speaking, hard nouns are much more common. But it's very important from the very beginning to distinguish clearly, just as we did with pronunciation, right? We first have to hear the distinction between hard and soft. We have to know how that difference is represented through the spelling system. And now in terms of grammar, that difference is going to be very important because whenever we add endings to, for example, a soft noun, we're going to have to add the soft version of a given ending, right? We can't take a soft noun and suddenly change the ending in such a way that it becomes hard, right? We're going to always be preserving this hard versus soft distinction when we start manipulating the endings of words. Okay, so let's read through these just for pronunciation practice. Starting with masculines, shampooing, shampooing, словарь, словарь, день, день. And remember that i kratkaya also counts as a soft consonant, right? So some soft masculine nouns will end in an i kratkaya, for example, muzей, muzей. Now for soft nouns, they end in ya, идея, идея, неделя, неделя, простыня, простыня, статья, статья, семья, семья. And finally, neuter, платье, платье, полотенце, полотенце, белье, белье, имя, имя. That final word, we may have mentioned it already. That's an unusual noun type. There are some neuter nouns, just a handful of them really, maybe 10 or 12 of them in modern Russian that end in a mya, right? So here's one example of an exception, and get used to this, right? Almost any rule I give you, no matter how helpful, chances are there's going to be at least one exception somewhere in the language, right? Sometimes many exceptions. So if we simply looked at emia, based on what we've said so far, we would guess that it's a soft feminine noun, but it's not. It happens to be one of these unusual neuter nouns that end in mia. Okay, so we've just used that here because it's such an important word. At some point later in the course, we'll talk about how these nouns work and we'll learn a lot more about them. But for now, I think this is our only example for the time being of soft neuter nouns in mia. Now, so we just saw soft nouns in each gender. We're going to add one little subgroup to these soft nouns. We're going to call these special soft nouns. Okay, let's think about the nomenclature there, right? Special soft nouns. These are soft nouns, right? In the same way that we just saw with the ordinary soft nouns. So they are soft nouns. Let's look at the examples. We see a masculine in ikratkaya, just like muzey. We see the word for last name, familia, ends in a ya, so we can see that it's a soft feminine. And finally, the word for schedule, raspisania, ends in a ye. So simply by looking, we can see that it too is a soft neuter noun. But if we look more closely, we see that those endings are all preceded in these words by an e, right? E ikratkaya for masculines, e ya for feminines, and e ye for neuters. That is what's going to allow us to spot these so-called special soft nouns, right? So just by looking at a noun, we can tell that it's a special soft noun. And this is going to be important later, right? So you'll learn later why we're having to group these somewhat separately from just ordinary soft nouns. To be specific, in some cases, their endings will be slightly different, right? Somewhat unexpected. So we're going to have to group them separately from the very beginning. Now, this is really important because while there aren't very many special soft masculine nouns in Russian, there are tons and tons and tons of special soft feminines and neuters in Russian. So they're actually a very, very important class of noun. And so again, we're going to pay very close attention to them from the very beginning and group them separately. So let's, again, practice our pronunciation. Cafetieri. Cafetieri, familia, familia, fotografia, fotografia, historia, historia, расписание, расписание, упражнение, упражнение, задание, задание. And note again that those endings are two syllables, right? Ya for feminine, ye for neuter, right? So fotografia or fotografia with the reduction, and расписание for schedule, расписание. Okay, so let's now practice spotting grammatical gender in nouns by assigning them a pronoun, right? So in Russian, there are three pronouns: on, она, оно. At least for now, we have those three forms. On refers to a masculine noun. Ana refers to a feminine noun. And ano refers to a neuter noun, right? And we can see again, even with these pronouns we just added, we can just look at them and distinguish between the three forms. On, ana, ano, right? On has no ending. Ana has the feminine ending a, and ano has the neuter ending o. Now, it's very important. This can be rather confusing for English speakers, right? Remember that anything in Russian can be, for example, a she, right? Anything, even objects, can have feminine gender, right? So if we refer back to that thing, well, it could be a she in English, like that's my sister. She is older than me, or whatever, right? That would be Anna, right? Speaking of our sister. But what if we want to refer to a book, kniga? Well, in English, of course, we'd say it. This is a book, it is new. But in Russian, we're going to choose a pronoun to match its grammatical gender. Kniga is feminine. So to refer to the book using a pronoun like in English, it, we'll use ana, ana. Kniga is ana, right? But again, we would translate that into English, of course, using it. But in Russian, it has more of the, I guess, it may strike you as being a kind of she, right? This is a book, she is new, right? Because we're reflecting the feminine gender of the noun we're referring to. So in the exercise here, let's just look at some nouns and try to spot the gender and give the pronoun we would use to refer to these nouns. Телефон. That's masculine, so we'd use on, right? So it, meaning the telephone, would be on. What about slavar? That's a soft masculine, right? Ends in a consonant. And so that would also be on, right? It, the dictionary, would be on. Окно is neuter. So if we refer to the window using a pronoun like in English, it, in Russian that will be оно. What about работа? That's feminine, so it, meaning referring to work, would be in Russian она. Okay, let's move a bit more quickly. I think you get the idea. It's not too difficult. Shampooing. Soft masculine, that'll be on, shampoo. Idea, idea. Soft feminine, она. Платье, a dress. That's a soft neuter, so that will be оно. Film, that's a hard masculine. That'll be on. Ответ, another hard masculine, right? Answer. On. Зеркало, mirror. Okay, that's a hard neuter. So the pronoun will be оно. Задание. Okay, we can tell very easily that's a soft neuter. And it's also a special soft neuter, right? Yeah, special soft neuter. The pronoun will be оно. Задание is an assignment. История, history. История. Okay, that's a special soft feminine. That will be она. Плакат. That's a hard, meaning poster. A hard masculine, sorry. So the pronoun will be on. Машина. Hard feminine. Она. That means car, not machine, but car. Мяч, meaning ball. Hard masculine. On. And finally, muzей, ending in an i kratkaya. Remember, that's also a soft noun, a soft masculine. So museum, the pronoun would be on, on. Okay, time for a really important word in Russian, and you should be on guard because this little word, it looks so innocent, but it causes so many problems down the road. Um, это, это. Okay, in 6.5 here, we're using eta as what we'll call a pointing word. It's simply kind of a rather empty pointing word that's simply used to point at something else. Like, hey, look at my dictionary. Pointing, eta slavar, right? This is a dictionary. So imagine when you're using eta in this way, this pointing gesture. The main reason this gets confusing, and we'll see more later, is that eta, the pointing word, is not the subject of a Russian sentence, right? It cannot be the subject. It's not a noun. It's not a pronoun. Again, in this usage, it's simply kind of a pointing gesture. So let's look at the examples in the book. We have several very simple sentence structures, very useful constructions. Что это? Okay, now imagine the это, we're pointing at something, and we're saying что, what? What is this thing I'm pointing at? Что это? Что это? Well, an answer, это ручка, right? Again, pointing at the thing, это ручка. That is a pen, or this is a pen. Now, if we replaced pen with a pronoun and we say this is it, that would be это она, right? The ana is pointing back, referring to a ручка, which is grammatically feminine. Okay, let's say some more things about this feminine thing, this pen. Она новая. Она новая. Okay, ana, a feminine it, is new, and we use the feminine form of the adjective, which is новая. Aya, right? The ending aya is feminine. Она новая. Новая. Ручка новая. Ручка новая. The pen is new. What's missing from the Russian? The linking verb is, right? So Russian doesn't normally use a verb is. That's simply understood. We'll talk more in a moment about when it does include the verb is. Ручка новая. Это новая ручка. This is a new pen. Again, imagine это, we're pointing out something, we're naming it. That's a new pen. Это новая ручка. I note already that это, this pointing gesture, can be translated as this or that. It would depend on the context in English, right? Whether we're pointing to something close to us or further away, right? Russian doesn't normally make that distinction quite as often as English does. We'll talk more about that later. Okay, and what's this? А что это? Here is simply marking a follow-up question, right? So we've asked about the pen. Now let's move on to something else and say, а что это? А что это? Right, again, pointing. Это. Это что? А что это? Это зеркало. Это зеркало. Это оно. Это оно. This is it, meaning the mirror, which is a neuter thing, right? So if we use a pronoun, we need to use оно. Это оно. Оно новое. Оно новое, right? Note the now neuter form of the adjective. Новое. Оно новое. Зеркало новое. The mirror is new. Это новое зеркало. This is a new mirror. Again, no linking verb here, no is in the Russian. Finally, let's get a masculine example. А что это? А что это? What is this? This third thing. Это зонт. Это зонт. This is an umbrella. This is it. That will be это он, right? Он, referring to the masculine umbrella зонт. Зонт. Он новый. Он новый. It is new. Now we have the masculine form of the adjective new. So now we see examples of all three gender endings for adjectives. Novaya, feminine, novaya, neuter, and finally novy for masculine. Zont novy, the umbrella is new. Это новый зонт. This is a new umbrella. Okay, so again, look over those examples and you see we have for now little arrows pointing out the agreement, right? So for example, any pronoun we use refers back to a noun and needs to reflect its gender correctly. Any adjective that's modifying a noun has to agree with the noun in terms of gender. It has to reflect that noun's gender. So those arrows are all drawing your attention to those issues of what we'll call gender agreement. Again, we noted that the Russian linking verb is, or if it were plural, it would be are, right? That's usually omitted in Russian, right? So more on that later. But in all these examples, we see that there is no Russian verb present, meaning is. Okay, let's again supply some more pronouns. I'll move more quickly. This is, I think, should be fairly easy at this point. So let's say things like, this is a book, this is it. Okay, now remember, when we say it, we can't just use neuter gender in Russian. We've got to capture the gender of the item we're talking about. Это книга. Это она. Это телевизор. Это он. Это окно. This is a window. Это оно. Neuter. Number 4. Это словарь. This is a dictionary. Это он. Это он. Number 5. Это простыня. This is a bed sheet. Это она. Она. Feminine. 6. Это одеяло. Это одеяло. This is a cover, a blanket. Это оно. Оно. Neuter. 7. Это платье. Это платье. This is a dress. Neuter. Это оно. Это оно. 8. Это расписание. This is a schedule. Это расписание. Это оно. Оно. 9. Это фотография. Это она. Она. Number 10. Это кафетерий. This is a cafeteria. Это он. On, right? A special soft masculine noun. Это ключ. Это ключ. Это он. This is it. Это он. Masculine referring to ключ. Number 12. Это картина. Это картина. Это она. Это она. Это музей. This is a museum. Это музей. Or imagine if we're standing in the street, we may be pointing to it rather far away, and we would say in English, that's a museum, right? So this versus that, it really depends on the context. Это can mean both, but in any case, we're simply pointing at something. Это музей. Это он. Это белье. This is the laundry. Это оно. Это оно. Это полотенце. This is a towel. Это полотенце. Это оно. Это оно. Это этажерка. Это этажерка. This is a bookcase. Это она. Feminine. Она. Это телевизор. Это он. Это плакат. This is a poster. Это он. Это он. That's it. That's the poster. Это он. Number 19. Это статья. Это статья. Это она. Она. Feminine. 20. Это задание. Это задание. Это оно. Это оно. Neuter. Special soft neuter. 21. Это шампунь. Это шампунь. Это он. Soft masculine. 22. Это зонт. Это зонт. Это он. Это он. 23. Это книга. Это книга. Это она, feminine. And 24, be careful, это имя. Okay, that's a very special kind of neuter noun. So despite ending in a ya, it's neuter, so we would say это оно. Okay, let's look at exercise 6C and just practice some more very simple sentences using these three words we've learned. The pointing word это, nouns, pronouns, and adjectives. So I guess now four types of words that we're juggling. So look at the examples. Что это? Now remember, in English that could translate to what's this or what's that, right? Just depending on context. Что это? Это компьютер. Он новый. It is new. Now remember, we're talking about a computer, so even though the noun computer is itself not present in this new sentence, он новый, we're still talking about it. So everything, the pronoun and the adjective that refer to computer, they both have to agree with its gender. Он новый. Это новый компьютер. Here's a nice full sentence. This is a new computer. Okay, so let's just fill in the blanks. Number one, что это? Это карандаш. Он новый. Это новый карандаш. Number two, что это? Это музей. Он интересный. It is interesting. Он интересный. Это интересный музей. Three, что это? Это платье. It's a dress. Оно новое. Оно новое. Neuter. Оно новое. Это новое платье. Это новое платье. Number four, что это? Это расписание. It's a schedule. Оно интересное. Это интересное написание. Number five, что это? Это стул. It's a chair. Он старый. It's old. Это старый стул. Number six, что это? Это кресло. An armchair. Оно старое. Оно старое. Это старое кресло. Seven, что это? Это мяч. Он новый. Он новый. Это новый мяч. Это новый мяч. A ball. Что это? Это книга. A book. Она новая. Она новая. Это новая книга. Now, one more important point of grammar today is how do we express possession? And this brings us to another word we'll be using a lot and really emphasizing throughout, especially books 1 and 2, right? The idea of an idiom. Right? So when we say idiom, we mean the sometimes peculiar way a given language has of expressing even a very basic idea. In today's example, that idea is possession, right? How do we express possession? Well, in English, we use a noun, right? A verb, to have, right? I have a book, right? That's just the basic way to say that you possess a book. I have a book, I have a car, I have a computer. Now, in Russian, the idiom is going to be completely different. We're going to say something like, at me is a book, right? So now note how different this is grammatically. In English, if we say, I have a book, the book is the direct object of the verb have. That's the subject. I have a book, right? Subject, verb, direct object. But in the Russian idiom, the book is at me, right? So book is the subject of the sentence, right? The thing we have is now the subject of the Russian sentence. So it's little things like that that can really cause confusion because sometimes it's with these the simplest of examples that our mind is so hardwired to think of things, to view the world through the lens of English language idioms, that it can be very difficult to rewire our brains and speak the way Russians would. So when we come to one of these tricky idioms, we're going to really try to take a lot of care in showing what the Russian is literally saying. And we're going to always need to be on guard about the fact that if we are speaking Russian by essentially translating English idioms, our Russian is going to be completely wrong, right? So we've got to really get away from uh, English language assumptions. Okay, so anyway, what is the Russian for at me is? Well, we're going to use a preposition u, which means something like at or near, right? In this, at least in this sense, right? U. Um, and in Russian, a given preposition will be followed by a given case, right? A given grammatical case. We're going to talk a lot more about that later. But today we're just learning, you can think of these as sort of fixed expressions. We don't really have to understand every last bit of the grammar behind them. But essentially, we're going to be following the preposition u with the genitive form of the pronouns we just learned, and along with a few others, right? So, for example, the genitive of on is nivo, right? So, if we say у него есть книга, it means literally at him is book, right? At him is a book. Again, that expresses possession. It means he has a book, right? Okay, so let's go over these new genitive forms. And again, we're going to be using these as prepositional phrases. So let's read through them. Yeah. Okay, there's our nominative case form of the first singular pronoun, right? I. Yeah. That's the nominative. Now the genitive is меня. So that gives us the phrase у меня, literally at me, or I have. Ты, as we know, is the familiar version of the second singular pronoun. Ты. The phrase will be у тебя, at you is. Now for the third singular, он, она, оно, right? He, she, it. These genitive phrases are going to be у него, у нее, у него. Now note very carefully that in this genitive form, we write g, but we say v, right? We pronounce the G, so to speak, as if it were a V. So that's a very important exception to the general rule that we have one letter, one sound, more or less, in Russian spelling. This is an obvious violation of that rule, and it only happens in genitive case forms, right? So we'll talk more about that later. For now, just note this exception. У него, at him, у нее, at her, у него, at it. Okay, мы, there's our nominative form of we. At us is going to be у нас. Вы, that can refer to multiple yous, like, right, the you plural, or as we know, this could also be the polite form of you singular, right? So it could be either of those things. Вы. At you is у вас. Finally, third plural, они. They, at them will be у них. Okay, so we follow those expressions with a linking verb is and a noun in the nominative, right? Remember, the noun in these constructions is indeed the subject of the sentence, right? So let's look at the first example. The question, do you have a book? Literally, we're asking, book is at you, right? At you is book. At you is book. Okay, у тебя есть книга? У тебя есть книга? Okay, now we're seeing that in this question, a linking verb, right, a Russian equivalent of is being used, and that is есть. Okay, why is it being included here if it wasn't earlier? Because here in this question, it's really the point of the question, right? Do you have a book or do you not have a book? Is it at you or is it not at you, so to speak? Right? So if the is being emphasized, if it's really kind of the point of this sentence, then we do have to include it. We don't just leave it understood, right? We include it in the Russian sentence. У тебя есть книга? У тебя есть книга? Response, да, у меня есть книга. У меня есть книга. At me is book. У вас есть зонт? Do you have an umbrella? Okay, this could, we're using вы here. We could be talking to one person politely or to multiple people, right? Whether politely or familiarly. У вас есть зонт? Right? Do you have an umbrella? Да, у нас есть зонт. Yes, we have an umbrella. At us is umbrella. Okay, more examples. У тебя есть книга? Okay, again, same as before, we're seeing here that we're using the есть because it's kind of the crux of the question. Да, есть. Yes, it is, right? A book is at me. Есть. Она новая. It's new. Книга у тебя новая? Okay, now, what's been left out here? The есть. Why has it been dropped? Because it's no longer the point of the question, right? We know that this person has a book. We're not asking whether or not it actually exists. We're asking now about whether or not it's new, right? So because есть is no longer the crux of the question, we drop it, right? Книга у тебя новая? Книга у тебя новая? Да, новая. Yeah, it's new. Okay, let's do a few simple examples. У кого есть книга? У меня есть книга. Okay, let's use now on. У кого есть телевизор? Who has a television? Let's say he has a television. У него есть телевизор. У него есть телевизор. У кого есть телефон? Who's got a telephone? Let's use она. У нее есть телефон. 3. У кого есть машина? Who has a car? Let's say they, они. У них есть машина. У них есть машина. У кого есть зонт? Who's got an umbrella? Let's say ты, all right, you, familiar, have an umbrella. У тебя есть зонт. У тебя есть зонт. У кого есть окно? Who's got a window? Вы, right? So we're either being polite or we're just speaking to multiple people. У вас есть зонт. У вас есть зонт. У кого есть идея? Who's got an idea? Let's say мы, we. У нас есть идея. У нас есть идея. Okay, a couple more things quickly. You may have noticed that Russian has no articles, right? It has no indefinite versus definite articles like English an, right, the indefinite, and the definite article. And, sometimes I like to point out that, there are some ways in which English is very difficult compared to Russian, especially for Russian speakers who are learning English, because again, they're facing the same dilemmas often, just kind of in the opposite direction, right? They're going from their Russian idiom to the English idiom, for example. So it can be equally difficult for Russians. And of course, articles are one grammatical category that Russian, as we now know, doesn't have at all. And so it's actually a big struggle for Russians to learn when to use the indefinite article, when to use a definite article, or when to use no article at all in English. And as native speakers, that's something we probably take for granted. But if you've ever talked to a foreigner who's learning English as a second language, and maybe they've asked you a question about when to use an article, if, of course, their language doesn't have articles, and you'll notice that can be very difficult to do, even for a native speaker, right? We know these things kind of intuitively, but when we start trying to explain them, we find suddenly that it's very difficult to explain sort of rationally, right? So anyway, it's something to watch for. Okay, look at a couple of examples, right? У тебя есть книга? Do you have a book? Now, of course, if we've already been talking about this book and we have in mind a specific book, that Russian sentence could also mean, do you have the book, right? Do you have the book? Now, sometimes Russian word order can help nudge us in one direction or another, sort of letting us know, are we talking about a book, right, that we've never mentioned before, or are we talking about the book, right? Something we've already talked about, and now maybe we're saying something else about it, right? And this brings us to our first mention of how Russian word order works. We're going to be talking a lot about this. It's a rather interesting topic, but in short, Russian word order is much more flexible than English word order because Russian is heavily inflected. That means that the case endings are going to tell us what role a given word is playing in a Russian sentence, whereas in English sentences, typically word order is telling us a lot about uh, what role a word is playing in the sentence. So we'll talk a lot more about that later. Russian word order is very flexible, but it's generally governed by what is regarded as most interesting or new in a given sentence. That will tend to appear at the end of the sentence. Right? So for that reason, if we hear a Russian sentence, "У тебя есть книга?" Kniga comes at the end, and that implies that this kniga thing is something we haven't spoken about before, right? So we would probably guess, absent any further context, that this means, do you have a book? У тебя есть книга? Whereas the question, книга у тебя есть? Книга у тебя есть? Could, again, absent any further context, it could imply that we've already spoken about this book. It's not at the end of the sentence. It's not something new and terribly interesting, right? The question is really the emphasis is on the есть, right? Do you have the book? Do you have it or do you not? So книга у тебя есть. Okay, so we'll talk more about that later. This is our first glance at it, and I'm sure it seems a little bit subtle. But not to worry, we'll talk a lot more about how Russian word order works as we progress through the grammar. Okay, how do we negate things in Russian? That's pretty easy. We're going to use не, right? Не means essentially not, right? So for example, это компьютер means this is a computer. Это не карандаш means this isn't a pencil, right? Это не карандаш, это компьютер. Okay, let's stick with the first example. Это компьютер. This is a computer. Он не новый. It's not new. Он не новый. Он старый и обычный. It's old and ordinary. Это не карандаш. This is not a pencil. Это ручка. It's a pen. Она очень необычная. It's very unusual. Okay, let's do a few examples. And here we can kind of give free responses, right? Talking about our things and saying, are they new or not new? Okay, so I'll kind of pick randomly whether we're negating it or not. У тебя есть машина? Do you have a car? Да, есть. Let's say it is new. Она новая. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. Yes, I also have it. At me also is, literally. At me also is. У тебя есть комната? Do you have a room? Да, есть. Let's say it's not new. Она не новая. Она не новая. А у тебя? Right? And at you, right? Follow-up question meaning, what about you? Do you have a room? Да, у меня тоже есть. Yes, I also have one. У меня тоже есть. 3. У тебя есть компьютер? Да, есть. Let's say it's not new. Он не новый. Он не новый. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. 4. У тебя есть рубашка? Do you have a shirt? Да, есть. Let's say it's a new shirt. Она новая. Она новая. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. Number 5, do you have a wallet? У тебя есть кошелек? Да, есть. Let's say it's not new. Он не новый. Он не новый. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. Number 6, do you have a pen? У тебя есть ручка? Да, есть. Let's say it's new. Она новая. Она новая. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. Finally, у тебя есть велосипед? Do you have a bicycle? Есть, да, есть. Let's say it's not new. Он не новый. Он не новый. А у тебя? Да, у меня тоже есть. Okay, we can use the same construction we just learned, the у, меня, у вас, у тебя, and so forth, right? У followed by the genitive to ask a pretty useful question. How are things? Right? Literally, we're going to be asking, how are things at you? Right? How's it going? Right? Как у вас дела? Как у вас дела? Okay, there's the polite way to say it, right? Вы, using вы. Как у вас дела? The familiar version using ты would be как у тебя дела? Как у тебя дела? Дела is a plural form of the noun we saw earlier, дело, meaning a thing, an affair, a matter, almost anything like that, right? How are your affairs? How are your matters? Как у тебя дела? Or simply как дела? Как дела? Here's some basic answers. У меня все хорошо. У меня все хорошо. Everything at me is good. У меня все хорошо. Все отлично. Everything's great. Все отлично. Or more simple answers. Плохо. Плохо. Meaning things aren't so good, they're bad. Нормально. Okay, that's just kind of an expression of indifference, right? Nothing to write home about. Нормально. Нормально. Кто это? Это Ленин. Это Ленин, конечно. It's Lenin, of course. Он коммунист? Is he a communist? Конечно, да, он коммунист, конечно, of course. Как у него дела? Как у него дела? У него все хорошо, у него все хорошо. У него есть газета. У него есть новая газета. Она хорошая или нет? Да, хорошая, хорошая. Это газета «Правда». Это газета «Правда». That's the newspaper «Правда», right? Meaning truth, the famous communist era newspaper. Okay, that's enough today. Tomorrow we'll go further and talk in more detail about adjectives. Значит, до завтра. So, until tomorrow. Значит, до завтра. До свидания, товарищ.